In the silent cemetery, the millionaire knelt before his daughter's gravestone, sobbing as if life had been ripped from him. What he never imagined was that his daughter was alive and about to reveal a truth that would change everything forever. The cemetery was hushed, gripped by a chill that seemed to cut through the skin. John Harrison walked alone, with dragging steps, his face downcast as if life had departed along with his daughter. It had been 2 months since the millionaire buried Isabella after the tragedy no one could foresee. The 12-year-old girl had gone to spend the weekend at the stepmother Stella's cabin in the remote woods of upstate New York, a woman who had always treated her with apparent kindness. But while Stella was away handling business in the city, a devastating fire consumed the house. Firefighters found unrecognizable rubble, and among it, the girl's personal belongings. John didn't question it, accepting the death, drowned in grief. Since then, he survived on the almost maternal affection of his wife Stella, who blamed herself for not being there, and on the firm support of Mark, his brother, 2 years younger and a business partner, who repeated every day, "I'll handle the company. You just try to stay on your feet. I'm with you, brother." Kneeling before the gravestone, John let the weight of it all crush him at once. He ran his fingers over the cold inscription, murmuring between sobs, "Beloved daughter, rest in peace. How am I supposed to rest, daughter, if you're not here anymore?" The tears fell unchecked. He pulled a silver bracelet from his pocket, the gift he'd given her on her last birthday, and held it as if it were the girl's little hand. "You promised you'd never leave me, remember? And now I don't know how to breathe without you," he whispered with a broken voice, his shoulders shaking. Inside, a whirlwind of thoughts devoured him. What if I'd gone with her? What if I'd arrived in time? The guilt wouldn't leave him in peace. He felt like a failed father, unable to protect the one he loved most. His chest burned with the same fury that had devoured the cabin. "I'd give everything, my girl, everything, if I could hug you one more time," he confessed, looking at the sky as if expecting an answer. And it was precisely at that moment when the invisible happened. A few yards behind a sturdy tree, Isabella was alive, thin with teary eyes fixed on her father in silence. The girl had managed to escape from where she was held prisoner. Her heart pounded so hard it seemed ready to burst from her chest. Her fingers clung to the tree bark, while discreet tears rolled down her face. Seeing her father like that, shattered, was a torture no child should face. She took a step forward but retreated immediately, swallowing a sob. Her thoughts tumbled over each other. "Run, hug him, show him you're alive." "No, I can't. If they find out I escaped, they might hurt him too." The dilemma crushed her. She wanted to scream, say she was there, but she knew that hug could cost too dearly. From where she stood, Isabella could hear her father's broken voice repeating, "I promise you, daughter, I'll go on, even if I feel like I've already died inside." With every word, the urge to reveal herself became unbearable. She bit her lips until she tasted blood, trying to contain the impulse. The love that bound them was so strong it seemed impossible to resist. Still, she stayed motionless, a prisoner of a fear greater than nostalgia. As John rose with difficulty, tucking the bracelet against his chest like a talisman, Isabella closed her eyes and let another tear escape. The world was too cruel to allow father and daughter to reunite in that instant, and she, hidden in the tree's shadow, understood she had to wait. The hug would have to be postponed, even if it tore her apart inside. Back in her prison, Isabella kept her steps small and her body hunched, like someone fearing even the walls could betray her. Hours earlier, she'd gathered the courage to escape for a few minutes, just to see her father and feel the world still existed beyond that nightmare. But now she returned, hurried, gripped by the panic that they would discover her absence. She couldn't take risks. Until that moment, she'd never heard clear voices, never seen faces, only shadows that kept her locked away as if her life had shrunk to silence and fear. She still didn't know who her kidnappers were, but that night, everything would change. She lay on the worn mattress, pretending to sleep. The dark room felt like an airless tomb. Isabella squeezed her eyes shut, but her ears caught an unexpected sound. Laughter, voices, a muffled conversation from the hallway. Her heart raced. She sat up slowly, as if every movement could be a fatal mistake. She slid her bare feet across the cold floor and approached the slightly ajar door. Yellowish light from the living room filtered through the crack. She drew closer, and the words she heard changed her life forever. "It's been 2 months already, Mark," Stella said with a venomous calm. No one suspected a thing. Everyone believed the fire. Mark laughed low, leaning back on the sofa. "And that idiot of your husband? How's he suffering? Crying like a wretch, believing his daughter died. If he knew the truth," Stella let out a cackle, raising her wine glass. "Well, let him cry. Meanwhile, the inheritance is starting to have a secure destination. I've already begun the process myself. The poison is taking effect little by little. John has no idea that every sip of tea I prepare brings him closer to death." Isabella felt her body freeze. Poison. She nearly lost her strength. Tears welled in her eyes uncontrollably. That sweet voice that had so often lulled her to sleep was now real venom. And across from her, Uncle Mark sat satisfied. "What irony, huh? He trusts you more than anyone, and you're the one killing him. Brilliant, Stella. Brilliant." The two laughed together, mocking like predators before a helpless prey. "He deserves it," Stella added, her eyes gleaming with pleasure. "For years he boasted about being the great John Harrison. Now he's on his knees and doesn't even realize it. Soon they'll say it was a natural death, an unhappy coincidence, and we'll be the rightful heirs." Mark raised his glass in a toast to our victory and the fall of that poor fool. The toast was sealed with a passionate kiss that made Isabella clamp her hands over her mouth to avoid screaming. Her heart pounded wildly, as if about to explode. Her head spun. They're my kidnappers. The stepmother and the uncle were behind it from the start. The revelation crushed her. It was as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. The girl, who until then only feared shadows, now saw the faces of the monsters, people she knew, whom she trusted. The weight of the horror made her step back a few paces, nearly tripping on the creaking wood. The fear of being discovered was so great that her whole body shook uncontrollably. Isabella leaned against the room's wall, her eyes wide, sobs trapped in her throat. The desperation was suffocating. Her father wasn't just mourning a daughter who was alive. He was also drinking his own death sentence every day. "They're going to kill him. They're going to kill him, and I can't let that happen," she thought with her mind in turmoil. The crying ran hot down her face, but along with it sparked something different. A raw, desperate strength from someone who understood she carried a truth too big to silence. While in the living room, the traitors toasted like victors. Isabella curled up on the mattress, feigning sleep, praying no one noticed her wakefulness. But inside she knew her father's life hung by a thread, and only she, a scared, thin girl full of fear, could stop the next blow. The night stretched like an endless veil, and Isabella lay motionless on the hard mattress, her eyes fixed on the narrow window, looking outside. Stella and Mark's words hammered in her mind relentlessly, like a cruel sentence. They killed my childhood, lied to my dad, and now they want to take his life too. Each thought was a blow to her heart. Her thin body trembled, but her soul burned with a desperation that no longer fit in her chest. She knew if she stayed there, it would be too late. The courage she never imagined having was born amid the fear. With cautious movements, she waited until the silence became absolute. The laughter ceased, the footsteps faded, and only the distant sound of wind against the windows remained. Isabella got up, approached the back window, and slowly pushed the rusted wood. The creak sounded too loud, and she froze. Her heart seemed about to explode. No noise followed. She gathered strength, breathed deep, and slipped outside, falling onto the cold grass. The impact made her bite her lips, but she didn't dare let out a whimper. She stayed on her knees for a moment, looking back as if expecting them to appear any second. Then she ran. The path through the forest was harsh. Every branch snapping under her feet seemed to betray her escape. The cold cut her skin, and stones hurt the soles of her bare feet, but she didn't stop. The love for her father was greater than any pain. "I have to reach him. I have to save his life. They've already started poisoning him," her mind repeated like a frantic drum, and her thin legs, though shaky, obeyed the urgency. The early morning was long. The darkness seemed infinite, and hunger weighed on her, but nothing would make her give up. When the sky began to lighten, Isabella finally spotted the first streets of the city. Her heart beat even harder, and tears of relief mixed with sweat and exhaustion. Stumbling, she reached the entrance of John's mansion. The tall gate seemed impossible, but her will was greater than all. She gathered her last strength and pounded on the door, first softly, then with more desperation. "Dad, Dad," she murmured low, without even realizing. Footsteps sounded from the other side. Her heart nearly stopped. The door opened, and there he was, John, worn down with sunken eyes and a tired face. But upon seeing his daughter, he froze as if struck by lightning. His mouth opened silently. His hands trembled. "Isabella." The voice came out like a whisper, incredulous. She, without thinking, threw herself into his arms, and the clash turned into an explosion of emotion. The hug was so strong, it seemed to want to stitch every piece of pain in both. John sobbed loudly, his beard soaked in tears, repeating nonstop, "It's you, my daughter. It's you, my God. I can't believe it." Isabella cried into his chest, finally safe, breathing that scent of home she'd thought lost forever. For long minutes, they stayed clutched, as if the world had vanished. But amid the crying, Isabella lifted her face and spoke between sobs. "Dad, listen to me. I didn't die in that fire because I was never alone there. It was all planned. Stella, Uncle Mark, they set the fire to fake my death." John held her by the shoulders, his eyes wide open, unable to process. "What are you saying, Stella? Mark, no, that can't be true." His voice was a mix of disbelief and pain. Isabella, firm, despite the tears, continued, "I heard them, Dad. They laughed at you. They said 2 months have passed and no one suspected anything. And it's not just that. Stella's already started poisoning you. Every tea, every meal she prepares is poisoned. They want it to look like a natural death so they can take all your money. You're next, Dad." The words came out fast, desperate, as if her father's life depended on every second. John stepped back, bringing his hands to his face, and a roar of rage escaped his throat. The impact hit him like an avalanche. The man who, for weeks, had cried like a widower over his own daughter, now felt the pain transform into fury. He clenched his fists, his gaze hardened, and the tears once of mourning were now of hate. "They'll pay. Both of them will pay for every tear I shed, for every night they stole from me with you," he said with a firm voice, almost a shout. He hugged her again, stronger than before, and added, "You did well to escape, my girl. Now it's us two, and together we'll fight." John paced back and forth in the mansion study, his face flushed, veins throbbing in his temples. His hands shook with rage, but his eyes were fixed on his daughter, who watched him silently, still agitated from the escape. The weight of the revelation was crushing, and his mind spun in 1,000 directions. My own brother, the woman I trusted with my home, my life. "Traitors!" he exclaimed, slamming his closed fist against the mahogany desk. The sound echoed in the room, but it wasn't louder than John's accelerated breathing. Isabella approached slowly, fearing her father might let impulse drive him to act without thinking. "Dad, they're dangerous. You can't go after them like this. If they know I'm alive, they'll try to silence us again," she said, with a halting voice, but firm. John breathed deep, ran his hands over his face, and knelt before her, holding her small hands. "You're right, daughter. I won't let them hurt you again, not if it's the last thing I do." The silence between them broke with a phrase born as a promise. John, looking into her eyes, spoke low. "If we want to win, we have to play their way. They think I'm weak, that I'm on the edge of death. Well, let's let them think that." Isabella blinked, confused. "What do you mean, Dad?" He smiled bitterly. "I'm going to pretend I'm dying. I'll give them the victory they crave until the exact moment to snatch it from their hands." The girl felt a shiver run down her spine. It was risky, too dangerous, but seeing the conviction in her father's eyes, she couldn't refuse. "And me? What should I do?" she asked softly. John squeezed her hands and replied firmly, "If they notice you've disappeared again, they'll suspect and probably come after you. maybe finish what they started. I can't risk your life like that. You need to go back to where they're keeping you and stay there for 1 more week. That's the time I'll pretend to be sick until I die. After that week, escape again and meet me at the old iron bridge in Central Park in the afternoon, exactly at the spot where the old plaque is cracked. Understand?" A spark of complicity began to grow between them, an alliance forged in pain. Sitting side by side, father and daughter started sketching the plan. John explained each detail calmly, but his gaze showed a man at war. "I need to start looking sicker than I already do. I'll isolate myself, cancel commitments, seem fragile. They can't suspect I know anything." Isabella, with her heart racing, murmured, "But what if the poison continues?" He caressed her face and replied, "I won't touch anything from their hands, not even a glass of water. It need to be care for me and other begin from today. They think they have me in their grasp, but we're the ones pulling the strings." Tears returned to the girl's eyes, but not just from fear. There was a silent pride in her chest. For the first time, she wasn't just the protected daughter. She was part of the fight. John hugged her again, but now with different energy. It wasn't the hug of pain anymore, but of alliance. "They think we're weak, Isabella, but together we're stronger than ever." In that stifling room with no witnesses but the walls, a pact was born that would change everything. Father and daughter, united not just by blood, but now by the thirst for justice. Pain gave way to strategy. The morning transformed into fire, and as the sun rose through the window, illuminating them both, it was clear the traitor's fate was sealed. All that remained was waiting for the exact moment to strike. John immersed himself in the role he'd written, starting the performance with calculated precision. He canceled commitments, distanced himself from partners, locked himself in the house as if his health were crumbling. The first news spread discreetly. Businessman John Harrison faces health issues. Little by little, the version solidified. John rehearsed in front of the mirror, the short breaths, the lost gaze, the dragging steps that would convince even the most skeptical. Then came the climax of the farce. Headlines spread across radios and newspapers. "John Harrison dies, victim of cardiac arrest." The country shuddered. Partners, clients, even rivals were caught by surprise. The news seemed incontestable, wrapped in carefully manipulated medical notes and statements from moved employees. In private, John watched the scene from afar, hidden, with his soul split in two. The half that suffered seeing his image buried, and the half that fueled the fire of vengeance. The funeral was worthy of a theatrical tragedy. The church was full. Cameras vied for angles. Flashes captured every detail. Stella shone in her act. Black veil, tears streaming, sobs that drew sighs from those present. "I lost the love of my life," she murmured, perfectly embodying the widow's pain. Mark, for his part, took the pulpit with a halting but firm voice. "I lost my brother, my partner, my best friend. His absence will be an impossible void to fill." The audience rose in respectful applause, and some even cried with them. It all seemed too real. Hidden in a nearby car, John watched from afar with a churning stomach. He saw Mark take Stella's hand with a nearly complicit gesture, and that confirmed his farce was complete, but also revealed the arrogance blinding them. "They think they've won," he whispered through gritted teeth, his eyes gleaming with hate. It was painful to see the world mourn his death, while the real enemies toasted victory. But that pain served as fuel for what would come next. After the funeral, Stella and Mark continued the performance. Backstage, they organized private meetings, exclusive dinners, toasts with imported wine. To poor John, they said between muffled laughs, mocking the naivety of a man who, to the end, believed in their loyalty. The public, however, only saw two devastated heirs united in the mission to honor the fallen patriarch's legacy. The press bought the story, reinforcing the image of a family tragedy hiding a macabre conspiracy. Meanwhile, Isabella lived her days in countdown. Back in the narrow room where they kept her, she repeated to herself the mantra her father had given. 1 week, just 1 week. Then I escape again and meet him at the Iron Bridge in Central Park. The girl's heart filled with anxiety and hope, even amid fear. She heard news fragments on the cabin's TV confirming John's death and bit her lips until they bled to avoid crying out loud. With every heartbeat, she repeated, "They didn't win. Dad's alive. We'll beat them." The world believed the mounted spectacle, and that was the most powerful weapon father and daughter had. The stage was set. The villains already savored their victory, and the play seemed to have ended. But behind the curtain, a new scene waited to be revealed. The days after John's death were heavy with silence in the mansion. Gates closed, flags at half-mast, employees walking hallways with heads down. But behind those walls, the atmosphere was different. Stella swapped mourning for silk dresses in less than a week, though she kept rehearsed tears whenever journalists appeared for quick interviews. Mark, with his serious air, took emergency meetings showing false sobriety. "We must honor my brother's memory," he said, drawing discreet applause from executives who believed they faced a broken man. In private encounters, however, the mask fell. Stella toasted with expensive wine, smiling with eyes gleaming in triumph. "We did it, Mark. The whole stage is ours, and no one even dares question." He raised his glass with a contained laugh. "The irony is perfect. That fool crying at his daughter's grave without imagining he'd be next. Now the empire he built is within our reach. The whole world cries for John, but we're the ones alive. Alive and millionaires." The two toasted, intertwining hands like newly crowned accomplices. The anticipation grew until the big day, the inheritance probate. Renowned lawyers were summoned, journalists crowded the entrance. Influential business people filled the courtroom seats. It was the moment when John Harrison's fortune, majority shareholder of the tech company and owner of an enviable estate, would be legally transferred. The atmosphere was solemn, but tension ran beneath the formality like an electric current. Stella and Mark appeared impeccably dressed, him in a dark gray suit, her in a black dress, blending mourning and power. When they entered, many rose to greet them with respectful gestures. The performance worked. Everyone saw them as the surviving victims of tragedy, people who, amid pain, held posture and assumed responsibilities. Stella wiped a discreet tear before the cameras, sighing, "John always believed in this company's future. Today, we'll continue that legacy." The speech rehearsed in the mirror drew moved looks from some lawyers and flashes from photographers. Mark, with firm voice, added, "It's what my brother would have wanted." The ceremony began. Papers were placed on the central table, and the judge presided with neutrality. Each signature was like a symbolic hammer, consolidating the theft they believed perfect. Stella leaned to write her name with elegant script, smiling sideways. Mark held the pen with the firmness of someone feeling like a world owner. Each stroke on paper sounded like a victory celebrated in silence. The audience watched in respectful quiet, some commenting among themselves on the widow and surviving brother's resilience. "They're strong," murmured one executive present. "They lost so much and still stand firm." If only they knew the truth. If they could see beyond the curtains, they'd see every tear was rehearsal and every gesture a farce. But to all eyes, this was the coronation moment. The Harrison Empire now had new owners. When the last page was signed, the judge rose and declared the inheritance officially probated. Stella closed her eyes briefly, savoring victory, and Mark squeezed her hand discreetly under the table. "It's over," he murmured with a satisfied smile. Escaping control. They believed they were at the top, untouchable, celebrating an impeccable plan's triumph. The courtroom was steeped in solemnity. Lawyers gathering papers, business people murmuring, journalists sharpening pens for the day's story. The judge wrapped the ceremony with normal airs. Stella sat like a haughty widow, letting a calculated sigh escape, while Mark, upright in his chair, already behaved as the new family pillar. Everything seemed consolidated, a closed chapter, until suddenly a boom made everyone's hearts race. The courtroom doors burst open violently, slamming the wall with force. The noise thundered, papers flew from tables, glasses spilled, and the whole room turned to the entrance. The air seemed to vanish when John Harrison appeared, walking with firm steps, eyes burning like embers. At his side, hand in hand, Isabella, the girl presumed dead, crossed the aisle with head high, tears shining in her eyes. The shock was so brutal that a deafening murmur invaded the place. Cries of disbelief, cameras firing non-stop, people rising from chairs in panic. Stella let out a choked scream, bringing hands to her mouth like seeing a ghost. This is impossible," she stammered with trembling lips, her body leaning back in the chair. Mark went livid, sweat beading on his forehead. He tried to stand but nearly fell, clutching the table to avoid collapsing. "It's a trick! It's a farce!" he yelled with a panicked voice, seeking support with his gaze, but no one responded. All eyes were fixed on them with a mix of horror and revulsion. John took the microphone, his face gripped by a fury he'd never shown publicly. His voice, laden with indignation, echoed in the room. "For 2 months they mourned my death. For 2 months they believed my daughter was taken by tragedy, but it was all just a repugnant performance planned by the woman I called wife and the brother I called blood." The audience exploded in murmurs and exclamations, but John raised his hand, his voice rising like a roar. "They planned every detail: the fire, my daughter's kidnapping, even my death with slow, cruel poison that I drank, trusting those treacherous hands." Stella stood abruptly, her veil falling from her face. "Lie! That's a lie! I loved you, John. I took care of you." Her voice was shrill, desperate, but her eyes betrayed fear. Mark also tried to react, shouting, "They made it all up! This is a show to destroy us!" But no one believed them. John advanced toward them, his voice heavy with pain and rage. "You mocked me, laughed at my pain while I cried at my daughter's grave, used my love, my trust, to try burying me alive." Isabella, her face soaked in tears, approached the microphone. The girl seemed fragile, but her voice cut the room like a sword. "I was there. They locked me up, kept me hidden. I heard them celebrating, laughing at my dad. They said they were going to kill him too, to take everything. They don't deserve mercy." The impact of her words was devastating. Some present began shouting in revulsion. Others rose indignant, and journalists rushed to record every word, every tear from the girl. On the screens, documents, audios, and images began appearing, evidence gathered by John and Isabella, including secret recordings from a hidden camera in the cabin that captured their confessions. Stella tried to advance, shouting, "This is manipulation, it's a lie," but was restrained by approaching police. Mark, pale, still tried excusing himself. "I'm innocent, it's her, that woman, she invented everything." But the audience saw no innocence, only exposed monsters. The room that minutes earlier applauded them now booed, pointed fingers, and some chanted for immediate prison. John, gripped by betrayal's pain, faced them like staring into an abyss. Tears streamed, but his voice came firm, laden with fire. "You stole my nights of sleep, robbed my peace. You nearly destroyed my daughter. Today, before everyone, you'll be remembered for what you really are: murderers, thieves, traitors." Stella screamed, trying to escape the cuffs. Mark trembled, murmuring senseless apologies, but it was too late. The whole room witness to one of the greatest farces ever seen now assisted the two's public fall. Cameras broadcast live. The crowd outside began shouting indignant, and John Harrison's name returned to life stronger than ever. In the center of the chaos, hand in hand with Isabella, he stood firm, gaze hard, fixed on his enemies. The return no one expected had become the definitive destruction of the lie. The room was still boiling when police led Stella and Mark away in cuffs under boos. Journalists shoved microphones. Cameras captured every tear, every scream, every detail of the two's fall. The public, shocked, couldn't process such a revelation. But for John and Isabella, that scene no longer mattered. The external chaos was just a distant echo against the internal whirlwind they lived. Leaving the courthouse, father and daughter entered the waiting car, and for the first time since reuniting, they could breathe away from the world's eyes. Isabella, exhausted, rested her head on her father's shoulder and fell asleep, eyes still damp. John wrapped his arm around her, feeling the weight of responsibility and at the same time the gift of having her alive. Back at the mansion, silence welcomed them like an old friend. It was no longer the mournful silence of invented death, but of a home waiting to be restored to its rightful state. John opened his daughter's room door, and time seemed to stop. The space was intact, as if the months of absence had been just a nightmare. The dolls were still lined on the shelf, books rested on the desk, and the blanket folded on the bed seemed to beg Isabella to lie there again. John observed each detail with teary eyes, running fingers over the furniture like touching a living memory. Isabella entered the room slowly, almost disbelieving. Her feet glided over the soft carpet, and she touched each object as if needing to confirm they were real. She took one doll in her arms and hugged it tight, letting tears fall. "I thought I'd never see this again, Dad," she said softly with a tight throat. John approached, knelt before her, and held her face gently. "I thought I'd never see you again, daughter, but you're here, and that's all that matters." The girl, tired of so much fear and struggle, finally allowed herself to surrender to safety. She climbed into bed, pulled the blanket over herself, and in minutes her eyes closed. John stayed seated beside her, just watching the peaceful breathing he'd longed to see again. His chest, once a battlefield of pain, now filled with a new, fragile, but real peace. He ran his hand through her hair, murmuring, "Sleep, my girl. I'm here now. No one will take you from me again." In the living room, the phone rang nonstop. Journalists, lawyers, friends, and the curious wanted news of the scandal, but John didn't answer. For the first time in months, nothing had higher priority than his daughter sleeping at home. He walked to the window and watched the moonlit garden. The night's silence was a balm, a truce after weeks of storm. Deep down, he knew the coming days would bring challenges, dealing with the press, restoring the company, facing betrayal's ghosts. But in that instant, he decided the future could wait. The clock marked late night when John returned to the room and reclined in the armchair by the bed. He closed his eyes, but didn't sleep. Each sigh from his daughter sounded like music. Each movement was a reminder that life still had meaning. The past wouldn't be forgotten, but now there was something greater, the chance to start over. "We won, Isabella," he murmured softly, though he knew the battle had cost dearly. Dawn brought soft light invading the room. Isabella woke sleepy and saw her father seated, exhausted, but smiling. She ran to him and hugged tight. John lifted his daughter in arms, spinning her like before when life was simple. Both laughed through tears, and in that instant, it seemed the world's weight finally lifted. The room was no longer a frozen memory. It was the start of a new phase. The next morning, the sky dawned clear, as if the universe itself announced a new time. John and Isabella walked side by side to the cemetery in silence, each step laden with memories and meanings. The iron gate creaked open, and the cold wind brought back echoes of painful days. The girl clutched her father's hand tight as one who never wants to let go. And there, before the gravestone, inscribed Isabella Harrison, "Rest in peace." John's heart tightened one last time. He looked at the cold stone, and his face contracted in indignation. That inscription was more than a lie. It was an invisible prison that had suffocated them both for 2 months. Without a word, John approached, placed hands on the marble, and pushed with all remaining strength. The dry sound of the stone falling echoed in the cemetery like thunder, ending an era. The gravestone broke in two, scattering fragments on the ground. The following silence was heavy, but also liberating. Isabella stepped back, surprised by the act, but soon felt a wave of relief course through her body. The stone that buried her alive no longer existed. She raised eyes to her father and with a trembling voice declared, "I wasn't born to be buried, Dad. I was born to live." Her words, simple and pure, pierced John like an arrow. He drew her close, hugging with all the strength of a heart in reconstruction. With teary eyes, John replied, voice firm and broken at once, "And I'll live to see you grow. I'll be in every step, every dream, every victory of yours. Nothing, not even death, will take me from you again." Isabella pressed against his chest, feeling her father's heartbeat in sync with hers. It was the sound of an eternal promise, sealed not just with words, but with the life they'd both chosen to reclaim. Around them, the cemetery seemed to witness a story's rebirth. Where mourning once reigned, hope now bloomed. The wind blew softly, lifting dry leaves that danced in the air as if destiny itself decided to rewrite their narrative. Father and daughter stayed embraced, allowing themselves to cry and smile at once. The falling tears were no longer of pain, but liberation. John lifted his face and contemplated the horizon. There were wounds time would never erase. His brother's betrayal, Stella's poison, the endless nights of mourning. But in that instant he understood life wasn't summed in losses. Life was in the small hand holding his, in the courage of the girl who'd survived the impossible, in the faith there'd always be a tomorrow to rebuild. He inhaled deeply and felt something he hadn't in months: peace. Isabella smiled, and the two walked toward the cemetery exit, leaving the broken grave behind, a symbol of a lie, finally destroyed. Each step affirmed the future belonged to them. Darkness had tried to swallow them, but failed. Love, truth, and courage had spoken louder. And together, father and daughter, they moved forward, ready to start anew. Because some stories don't end with death. They begin again when you choose to live. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Leave your like to support us and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates. That helps us keep creating the best for you. Until next time.